All right, let's go back to the issue of Palestinian prisoners that we were speaking about. And we're joined now by Noura Erakat, an associate professor at Rutgers University and a human rights lawyer. And she's joining us live from Philadelphia in the United States. Ms. Erakat, thank you very much for your time. So, Palestinian prisoners, do they receive due process or transparency in how their cases are dealt with?
I think that you answered that in your overview of this system. Palestinians have lived under military occupation for 56 years and an apartheid regime for 75 years that consolidates settler colonial expansion under military law, which is a form of exceptional law where you suspend civilian oversight and replace it with military oversight. You do not have due process. You cannot interrogate your accuser. You do not have the rights afforded to you as someone who is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Instead, within this military system, as we've seen and as has been documented, anyone who comes before this military tribunal has a 99.9% chance of conviction, which leads many in the Palestinian international human rights community and beyond to describe it as a kangaroo court. More, under this military law system, laws are legislated and can be retroactively applied, which means that people don't even know what laws exist and if they're violating them as they're taking place. This is meant to be an exceptional form of law in a moment of warfare or fog of war, but Israel has made military rule against Palestinians a permanent condition, one that has really made a mockery of international law, human rights law, even humanitarian law, and we should understand it for what it is, which is a steady takeover of Palestinian lands without the Palestinians on them, using a liberal framework of military exigency and a temporariness, a false temporariness.
And Ms. Erakat, we heard recently from Mustafa Barghouti, who's, the head of the political party, the Palestinian National Initiative, and he was trying to put the situation into context for us. He had mentioned something like 1 million Palestinians have been arrested since 1967. That's a population out of a population of around 5 million. When we talk about the prisoner exchange that's taking place, the 13 Israeli captives, every day of the ceasefire, 13 Israeli captives will be released in exchange for 39 Palestinian prisoners, 1 to 3. Israel usually always releases more Palestinians in exchange deals than the number of Israelis who are freed. Can you put that into context for us and tell us why that is?
I think just to highlight that 20% of the Palestinian population has been imprisoned by Israeli occupation forces. And that should tell us that it's not that Palestinians are committing crimes, but that the crime itself is to be Palestinian and to exist on the lands where Israel is trying to settle and confiscate and remove those Palestinians. Palestinians can be arrested for driving on a segregated road, for digging too deep for a water well where the law says that they couldn't dig that deep, for traveling to Jerusalem in order to pray if they're not residents there and didn't get a military permit in order to go there. It is so easy to be imprisoned that merely for existing you have that possibility. Also note that the way that we often talk about Palestinian prisoners is to describe them as prisoners as if they were convicted, when in fact we should understand them as hostages. These are Palestinians who are taken. As we indicated earlier, there is no due process. Oftentimes they're held without charge or trial indefinitely for many, many years. And this law, which we understand as administrative detention, to be able to hold Palestinians without charge or trial, to renew it every 6 months, is a derivative of British colonial law. So here, just to emphasize, the context that you're speaking about is a colonial context that is not in the past tense, but it is in the present tense. The same colonial frameworks that were used in order to govern natives, in order to either exploit them or in a settler colonial context to remove them altogether, is used here in order to hold Palestinians. The same can be said for the withholding of Palestinian corpses, including my cousin's corpse, now held for over 3.5 years. Ahmed Erakat, he's held under a British colonial law, Regulation 133, subsection 3, which was used in order to withhold a body to determine when it should be buried.
Yeah.
Israel's highest court has amended that law in order to hold now over 80 Palestinian corpses hostage after death, explicitly called them hostages after death to enter into negotiations.
It is a very grim situation. There is some hope now for the Palestinian prisoners who are alive and who are being released, but given that there is a maximum of 240 Israeli captives, and there has been talk about the potential for this 4-day ceasefire being extended, and that for, beyond the 4 days, beyond 13 Israeli captives being released on those 4 days, that if Hamas can continue to release some Israeli captives, then Palestinian prisoners will continue to be released. But again, given that there is a limited number of Israeli captives, how hopeful are you that this can lead to any, real change for the thousands of Palestinians, around 8,000 Palestinian prisoners who are in Israeli jails?
So there's 2 points to make here. One is, what do we expect immediately from this prisoner exchange that's taking place? And on that note, we have to remember that Hamas is also withholding several military leaders and officers captive, which will not be as easily released as the civilians. Instead, they will be withheld to be exchanged for Palestinian, high security level prisoners who Israel will be reticent to exchange. This will take many, many years, as we've seen in the past. But that's just on the prisoner exchange and what can be done. But this wasn't just about an exchange of prisoners. This was about ending conditions that have limited the possibility of Palestinian life. First and foremost is to end the siege on the Gaza Strip, to end the occupation, to actually dismantle apartheid. It wasn't merely to get us to this present point. We have to keep in mind that Israel, as the only sovereign from the river to the sea overseeing an apartheid regime, can easily rearrest all of these Palestinians unless there is a meaningful change that not just releases the prisoners, but actually undermines and switches this severe power imbalance that allows Israel to control Palestinian lives without them either being sovereigns of their own state or citizens of a state of Israel. Just thinking about that hypothetically. And so here we have to think about not just in the immediate moment, but also what comes next, given that Israel says that it plans on resuming its ethnic cleansing campaign in the north. And we see its military sniping at Palestinians who have just crossed over to check on their homes or on their families. We know that we're thinking far into the future, but even right now, Israel needs to upend its system of ethnic cleansing, apartheid, occupation, and settler colonialism.
Ms. Erakat, thank you so much for your time and your analysis on this. We really appreciate it. That is Noura Erakat joining us live from Philadelphia.